The island of Sodor is one of the most famous places in the world. It's known for its people, histories, and railways. Its engines are probably the most famous engines in the world. But not all engines are good. And in this case, one was good, one was terrifying. This is one of the most heartbreaking stories in Sudrian history. Our story begins in the late 1910s. It was after World War I, and the Sudric nation was trying to get back on its feet. It was trying to do so by creating a new line to a new quarry outside of Blue Mountain Quarry. There had already been a massive line up here known as the Great Quarry Line, and it only had one locomotive, Blue Mountain. But this new extended quarry needed its own engines, and so two were bought. One was a rebuilt Jennings loco into a small England class named Bertram. The other loco was built by the quarry's own manager, who remains anonymous. The engine was a Double Fairlie locomotive, built hoping to kind of give a new strength to the quarry, make it more busy, make more money. But this Double Fairlie was unusual to say the least. Double Fairlie was named Light Dark. One half was painted white and was named Light. He was a kind, gentle soul that always wished to do the best in his life and wanted to make friends and make anyone happy. Dark was a completely different story. He was painted jet black, and he was known to have scary looking red eyes. Unlike Light's personality, Dark was about as mean as you could get. He was ruthless, mean, and downright brutal in his sayings. He would say stuff that sounded so insulting, and no one seemed to like him. This Double Fairlie would become known as the Mixed Match Fairlie, for it had two bodies and two completely different personalities. This new extended quarry, which would become known as Fairlie Quarry, was fairly small compared to Blue Mountain Quarry. However, Bertram and Light Dark found much use there, and they were soon put to work. But from the beginning, things began to go wrong. Over time, Dark became malicious, and he began to act violently, even against Light's own commands. Light was considered the most favorable of the two, and was indeed the oldest, as he was the first section built. But he and Dark never got along. Actually, there were times where there would be loud arguments between the two, and Dark, from Bertram's perspective, would be insulting Light to near breaking point. No one knew why Dark was this, but it was probably because of his name and his dark color scheme. Trucks began to be destroyed, trains became runaways, and equipments began to go wrong. Many thought it was Dark's own feeling that had caused the entire mine to suddenly become dangerous. Even when the engines were working, Dark would force Light to bump into sidings or go off the rails. Dark was becoming very dangerous. Many of the workmen had begged the manager to make Light Dark into single Fairlie locomotives, but the manager wouldn't do it. He said, "Light Dark is a normal engine, and you are all wrong. Let him work in peace. If there's any more trouble, you'll be fired." And that was that for several months. Bertram knew that something was indeed wrong, and he would ask Light about this anytime they were in the shed, when Dark was either on his own mind or even asleep. Light would always say, "He's my brother. We must take care of each other. He might not love me, but I love him. And I will do the utmost best to keep this quarry functioning, Bertram. Do not worry yourself. Despite the fact he said this, Bertram could clearly tell that Light was becoming desperately abused by Dark, both physically and emotionally. He soon became the most damaged of the section of the Fairlie, with Dark being so clean. And I'm sorry to say that Dark would become the manager's favorite part of that Fairlie. Bertram was secretly outraged by this. Light had become depressed, but still pushed on, hoping that his brother would see sense, and they would be coming together as a Fairlie once again. I'm sorry to say, that would never happen. It was the night of October 30th, 1919. The quarry was just shutting down for the night, and Bertram was already at his shed, trying to get some sleep over a recent argument he had had with Dark. The workmen were cleaning up for the night, while Light Dark was shunting cars in the siding. All of a sudden, the men began to hear loud arguments. They could clearly tell that Light and Dark were getting into one of their frequent arguments again. They turned away and continued on with their work, but the arguments soon became louder. Curses and anything you would imagine were being hurled at by the two engines. Light was clearly getting abused, and he was desperately trying to get Dark to calm down. But Dark kept yelling, screaming, and then Dark would say this: "You are not my brother, and you will face the consequences." The workmen heard a loud crash. Workmen rushed to the scene of the disaster. They were horrified. Dark had somehow pushed Light into a siding near a cliff, which had caused a rock slide. Light was crushed to death. Amazingly, Dark was able to survive with only a few scratches. He was cursing over his brother's fate, laughing at his smoking wreck. Even though this was a double Fairlie, Dark could only imagine that he was one single Fairlie. Light was nothing more than a puny waste. Dark would curse for the rest of the night, saying, "He deserved it. He deserved what he got. I am the superior. I will live on." Light was no more. His abuse had come to a tragic, saddened end. The quarry was never the same after that. It immediately began to lose business, and Dark, being a double Fairlie, would never function again. Bertram did his best, but the quarry soon fell into bankruptcy. Everyone blamed the manager. "You could have prevented this. You could have stopped Light's abuse, but you didn't, and you caused his death. You didn't listen to him. You didn't listen to us. This is your fault." The quarry would close a year later. At this point, Dark had been placed in a shed. The engine was no longer operable. Without Light, Dark could not function. He fell into a deep depression and would lash out at anyone who came close to him. He was locked up in a shed, hoping to never see the light of day again. And then, on the anniversary of Light's death, the manager walked into his shed and said this: "Doc, I'm doing this for Light." Somehow, some way, the manager had been able to snug the explosives into the shed and committed suicide, taking Dark with him. The shed was nothing more than a smoldering crater with the remains of Dark and the manager. It was a horrifying scene. The quarry had come to an end, and its head had been ripped off. The line was closed and shut off from the outside world. Bertram was sold to the large quarry line to work with Blue Mountain and another engine, Proteus. Light and Doc were soon forgotten about, and no one remembered the story. But rumor has it that when you're out at the Blue Mountain Quarry late at night, you can hear the sounds of an engine at work, horrible cracking noises, screaming metal, and arguing. And even legend has it that you might even hear 2 whistles. It is the whistle of the 2 Fairlies as they run through the night, one trying to find peace, the other for revenge for the manager causing his death. If you listen out in the night, you can hear the 2 whistles. So let this be a warning to anyone else going to Blue Mountain Quarry or anywhere. If you look out into the night and you see a pair of eyes, one blue, the other red, it is light and dark, forever trying to get to their own respective place, one to heaven, the other to hell. Light and dark will haunt the quarry for what seems for an eternity.